Chosen one, this is your confirmation. Do not leave this season yet. What God is preparing for you is far closer than you think. There is a tendency in human nature to believe that life should unfold according to patterns we can understand. We create expectations about how success should arrive, how opportunities should appear, and especially how love should enter our lives. We build mental timelines. We tell ourselves that certain things should happen at a particular age, in a particular season, and through a particular type of person. When reality fails to match those expectations, we often assume something has gone wrong. Yet one of the most fascinating truths about life is that many of its greatest gifts arrive from directions we never anticipated. The reason this is difficult for us is psychological as much as spiritual. The human mind craves certainty. It wants a map before beginning a journey. It wants explanations before taking a step forward. We feel safer when we can predict outcomes. But if you look carefully at the moments that transformed your life most profoundly, you will notice something remarkable. They were rarely planned exactly as you imagined. The friendship that changed you, the opportunity that redirected your future, the lesson that matured your character, these often came unexpectedly. Love is no different. Many people unconsciously create a picture of who they believe should love them. They imagine the person's age, background, personality, and circumstances. Then they spend years comparing reality to that image. The problem is that expectations can become barriers. We become so focused on recognizing what we expected that we fail to recognize what has actually been given. This is where wisdom becomes important. Wisdom is not simply knowing what you want. Wisdom is remaining open to what you need. Throughout history, some of the greatest blessings arrived disguised as contradictions. What appeared unusual at first eventually revealed itself as purposeful. What seemed confusing became clear only in hindsight. Life has a way of teaching us that our perspective is limited. We see only a small portion of the story, while God sees the entire narrative. Consider how often people dismiss possibilities because they do not fit conventional thinking. They worry about appearances. They worry about opinions. They worry about whether others will understand. But truth has never depended on public approval. Something can be deeply right even when it appears unusual to those observing from the outside. The deeper question is not whether a situation matches society's expectations. The deeper question is whether it aligns with truth, character, and purpose. Sometimes God challenges our assumptions because assumptions can quietly become idols. We begin trusting our plans more than His guidance. We become attached to our vision of the future rather than remaining receptive to His. This is not merely a religious principle. It is a principle of growth itself. Every stage of maturity requires the willingness to release an old understanding in order to embrace a better one. A child sees the world one way, an adult sees it another. Wisdom develops when we learn that certainty is not always strength. Sometimes strength is the humility to admit that we do not know everything. Perhaps that is why unexpected relationships can be so transformative. They force us to examine our assumptions. They reveal hidden fears. They expose the ways we have allowed labels, expectations, and social norms to shape our thinking. They invite us to look beneath appearances and ask more meaningful questions. What kind of character does this person possess? What values guide their life? What kind of future are they building? Do they bring peace or confusion? Do they encourage growth or stagnation? These questions matter far more than the superficial measurements people often prioritize. The truth is that God's blessings rarely arrive wrapped in the packaging we expect. They arrive in forms that require discernment rather than assumption. They require faith rather than certainty. They require openness rather than control. And perhaps that is the lesson many people need to hear today. If you insist that every blessing must look exactly the way you imagined, you may spend your life overlooking miracles standing directly in front of you. The greatest opportunities, the deepest relationships, and the most meaningful chapters of Rome often begin the moment you stop telling God how your story must unfold and start trusting Him to write a better one. So before you reject what seems unexpected, ask yourself a simple question. Are you following your assumptions, or are you following the possibility that God may be doing something greater than you can currently see? Because sometimes the blessing that changes your life forever arrives in the one form you never thought to expect. If the first truth is that God often works beyond our expectations, then the next truth follows naturally. The age difference is not the real story. The real story is what lies beneath it. Human beings have always been tempted to judge by what is immediately visible. We notice appearances before character. We notice labels before substance. We notice categories before we notice the individual standing in front of us. It is one of the mind's shortcuts. Psychologists call it cognitive framing, the tendency to evaluate people based on pre-existing assumptions rather than direct experience. In simple terms, we often decide what something means before we truly understand it. That habit affects how people view relationships as much as anything else. The moment people hear that two individuals come from different generations, many immediately begin forming conclusions. They assume they understand the relationship before they know anything about the people involved. Yet this reveals an important truth about human judgment. It often focuses on the easiest thing to measure rather than the most important thing to understand. Age is easy to measure. Character is not. Commitment is not. Wisdom is not. Love is not. A calendar can tell you how many years a person has lived. It cannot tell you how deeply they care. It cannot tell you how faithfully they will stand beside someone during hardship. It cannot tell you whether they possess integrity, loyalty, compassion, or courage. And those are the qualities that determine the strength of a relationship. One of the great misunderstandings of modern culture is the belief that compatibility is primarily about similarity. We assume that two people must have identical backgrounds, identical experiences, or identical life stages in order to build something meaningful together. But history, experience, and human nature suggest otherwise. The strongest relationships are rarely built on sameness alone. They are built on shared values. Two people can come from different generations, yet share the same vision for life. They can have different experiences, yet possess the same commitment to honesty. They can have different stories, yet be moving toward the same purpose. In many ways, values create a deeper bond than circumstances ever could. Think about it for a moment. Have you ever met someone who immediately understood you, despite having a completely different background? And have you ever met someone who was remarkably similar to you on paper, yet felt like a stranger in every meaningful sense? That is because true connection operates at a deeper level than external categories. The heart recognizes things that statistics cannot explain. This does not mean wisdom should be ignored. It does not mean every relationship is automatically right, simply because emotions are involved. Wisdom always matters. Discernment always matters. Character always matters. But wisdom asks deeper questions than society often asks. Instead of focusing only on appearances, wisdom asks, does this person bring out the best in me? Do they encourage my growth? Do they respect my values? Can they be trusted? Do they help me become more of who God created me to be? Those questions reveal far more about a relationship than age ever will. In fact, many people spend years searching for someone who truly understands them. They encounter countless conversations, countless introductions, countless disappointments. Then one day, they meet someone who sees them clearly. Someone who values them for who they are, rather than what they can provide. Someone who listens, understands, and genuinely cares. When that happens, the most important question is not whether the relationship matches society's expectations. The important question is whether it reflects truth. Because truth has a quiet strength to it. It does not need constant validation. It does not need approval from every observer. It stands on its own foundation. This is why faith often requires courage. There will always be voices eager to tell you what should and should not be possible. There will always be opinions about what makes sense and what does not. But opinions are not the ultimate measure of reality. Character is, purpose is, love is, and perhaps that is why God so often directs our attention away from appearances and toward the heart. He understands something we frequently forget. The most important qualities in a person cannot be seen at first glance. They reveal themselves over time. They reveal themselves through actions. They reveal themselves through consistency, sacrifice, kindness, and faithfulness. So if God places someone in your path who genuinely values you, respects you, and walks beside you with sincerity, do not be too quick to measure the relationship by the standards of the crowd. Look deeper. Ask wiser questions. Seek truth beneath appearances. Because the relationships that endure are not built on numbers. They are built on the rare and powerful qualities that never grow old. Faith, trust, loyalty, and love. And when those qualities are present, what seems unusual to others may actually be part of a purpose far greater than anyone can yet see. What makes certain encounters feel extraordinary is not merely the moment they happen, but the good realization that they were shaping themselves long before either person was aware of it. We often think of relationships as beginning the day two people meet. Yet in a deeper sense, many of life's most meaningful connections begin years earlier, in the private experiences, struggles, victories, and lessons that prepare two individuals for one another. This is where many people misunderstand divine timing. They imagine that timing is simply about waiting. They assume God delays certain blessings until an appointed moment on a calendar. But preparation is often a more accurate description than delay. What feels like waiting from our perspective may actually be a season of development. God is not merely deciding when two lives should cross paths. He is shaping who those people will be when they finally meet. Consider your own journey. There are experiences you would not have understood 10 years ago. There are lessons you resisted before life taught them to you through hardship. There are strengths you now possess that were forged through challenges you once wished would disappear. The person you are today is not the same person you were in earlier seasons of life. Growth has changed you. Pain has changed you. Wisdom has changed you. And perhaps most importantly, time has revealed parts of your character that could not have emerged any other way. Human beings often view difficult seasons as interruptions to life. We think life will begin once the struggle ends. But many of those struggles are not interruptions at all. They are classrooms. They teach patience, resilience, humility, empathy, and faith. They shape the very qualities that make healthy relationships possible. Without those lessons, many people would receive blessings they are not yet prepared to sustain. That is an uncomfortable truth, but it is a necessary one. We tend to focus on what we desire. God often focuses on who we are becoming. The difference is profound. You may have wanted love years ago. You may have prayed for companionship, understanding, and connection. Yet if that relationship had arrived before certain lessons were learned, you might not have recognized its value. You might not have possessed the emotional maturity to nurture it. What seemed like a delay may actually have been protection. What felt like silence may have been preparation. And the same principle applies to the other person. It is easy to imagine your own journey as meaningful while overlooking theirs. But every individual carries a story. Every person has faced battles that others cannot see. Every person has experienced disappointments, moments of doubt, seasons of growth, and opportunities for transformation. The younger person entering your life did not simply appear out of nowhere. They, too, have been shaped by experience. They have learned lessons. They have overcome challenges. They have developed strengths. They have been growing into the person they were meant to become. This is why genuine connections often feel different from ordinary encounters. There is a sense of readiness, not perfection, because no human being is perfect, but readiness, a feeling that certain lessons have been learned, certain wounds have begun healing, and certain pieces of life have fallen into place. When two prepared people meet, the relationship often carries a different quality. It is less driven by fantasy and more grounded in reality, less focused on proving something and more focused on building something, less concerned with appearances and more concerned with purpose. That kind of connection does not happen by accident. It emerges from preparation. The philosopher often asks why some moments seem filled with meaning, while others pass unnoticed. One possible answer is that meaning appears when preparation meets opportunity. A seed does not become a tree overnight. It spends long periods developing beneath the surface before anyone sees visible growth. In much the same way, many of God's greatest works occur quietly, long before they become visible. The world celebrates arrivals. God often works in preparation. That distinction matters because it changes how we interpret our past. Instead of viewing difficult seasons as wasted years, we begin to see them as necessary chapters. Instead of regretting every setback, we recognize that some setbacks redirected us toward greater wisdom. Instead of asking only, "Why did this happen?" we begin asking, "What was this preparing me for?" Sometimes the answer becomes clear only later. Sometimes you look back and realize that the heartbreak taught discernment, the loneliness taught self-understanding, the disappointment taught resilience, the uncertainty taught trust, and all of it was shaping you for a future you could not yet see. So if God has brought someone into your life, do not assume the story began the day you met. The story may have been unfolding for years. Through every lesson, every challenge, every unexpected turn, both of your paths were being prepared, because divine timing is rarely about chance. It is about preparation, meeting purpose. And when two lives are shaped by that process, their meeting becomes more than a coincidence. It becomes a reminder that God is often working long before we recognize His hand. Before a person can fully receive new love, they often must confront something far more difficult, the wounds left behind by old pain. This is one of the great paradoxes of human nature. We long for connection, yet we sometimes build walls against the very thing we desire. We pray for love, yet when it approaches, we hesitate. We ask for a new beginning, yet we carry the fears of previous endings into every new opportunity. The problem is not that we do not want love. The problem is that pain has a way of teaching us lessons that are not always true. A painful experience can convince a person that trust is dangerous. A betrayal can convince them that vulnerability is weakness. A disappointment can convince them that hope leads only to heartbreak. Over time, these beliefs become invisible burdens. They shape how we see ourselves, how we see others, and how we interpret every relationship that enters our lives. Psychologically, this makes perfect sense. The mind is designed to protect us. When something hurts deeply, the brain remembers it. It creates associations intended to prevent future pain. In some situations, that protection is valuable, but there is also a hidden danger. The mind can become so focused on avoiding pain that it unintentionally blocks joy. A person who has been hurt may become cautious. Then caution becomes distance. Distance becomes isolation. And isolation becomes a prison disguised as safety. The tragedy is that many people do not realize this is happening. They believe they are protecting themselves when, in reality, they are preventing themselves from experiencing the very blessing they seek. This is why healing matters. Not because the past can be erased. It cannot. Not because painful memories suddenly disappear. They rarely do. Healing matters because it changes the power those experiences have over your future. There is a significant difference between remembering a wound and living inside it. Many people carry old relationships into new ones without realizing it. They expect the next person to behave like the last one. They assume history will repeat itself. Every disagreement feels like the beginning of abandonment. Every misunderstanding feels like proof that disaster is coming. But the truth is simple and profound. A new person should not be punished for wounds they did not create. Every meaningful relationship deserves to be seen for what it is, not through the lens of what came before it. That requires courage. perhaps more courage than people realize. It takes courage to trust again after betrayal. It takes courage to remain hopeful after disappointment. It takes courage to open your heart after it has been broken. Yet courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision that something else is more important than fear. And this is often where God's work becomes most visible, because God rarely sends new blessings simply to repeat old cycles. He is not interested in recreating the same pain under a different name. His purpose is transformation, growth, restoration. The seasons of difficulty you endured were not meant to define you forever. They were meant to teach you. There is a profound difference between those two things. Lessons are carried forward. Chains are left behind. Unfortunately, many people confuse the two. They continue carrying chains long after the lesson has been learned. They hold on to bitterness because it feels safer than forgiveness. They cling to disappointment because hope feels risky. They remain emotionally anchored to the past because moving forward requires uncertainty. Yet healing always involves release, not pretending the pain never happened, not denying what was lost, but refusing to allow yesterday's wounds to control tomorrow's possibilities. This is where faith and psychology meet in a remarkable way. Both recognize that transformation begins internally before it becomes visible externally. The relationship changes when the person changes. The future changes when perspective changes. The opportunities become different when the heart becomes capable of receiving them. Perhaps that is why some blessings arrive only after a season of healing, not because God withheld them, but because preparation was still taking place. The heart was still learning. The mind was still recovering. The soul was still discovering that it was stronger than it believed. And when that process begins to take root, something remarkable happens. Fear no longer sits on the throne. The past no longer dictates every decision. Old wounds stop defining personal identity. Instead of asking, "What if this ends like before?" a person begins asking, "What if this is different?" That single shift can change everything, because every meaningful chapter of life begins with the willingness to believe that the future does not have to resemble the past. So if God is bringing someone new into your life, do not let yesterday's pain become today's obstacle. Learn from the past, but do not live there. Carry the wisdom forward, but leave the chains behind. Because healing is not about forgetting what hurt you. Healing is about becoming free enough to receive what God may be sending next. And sometimes, the greatest act of faith is not waiting for a blessing to arrive. It is allowing yourself to believe that you are finally ready to receive it. As life unfolds, most people eventually discover a truth that is both comforting and unsettling. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. Some people enter our lives to teach us lessons. Some arrive during specific seasons and leave when that season ends. Others reveal strengths we did not know we possessed, or weaknesses we did not know we needed to confront. Their role is significant, but it is temporary. This realization can be painful, because human beings naturally long for permanence. We want certainty in an uncertain world. We want guarantees in a life that offers very few. Yet when we look back honestly, we can often see that certain relationships were preparing us for something deeper, rather than serving as the final destination themselves. The challenge is that while we are living through those experiences, we rarely recognize their purpose. We mistake temporary chapters for permanent ones. We hold on to what is ending because we fear what comes next. We become attached to familiarity, even when it is no longer helping us grow. But every now and then, a relationship feels different. Not because it is perfect, not because there are no challenges, not because there are never disagreements or moments of uncertainty. It feels different because it possesses a quality that many people spend years searching for, but rarely find: stability. There is a profound psychological difference between attraction and security. Attraction captures attention. Security captures the heart. Attraction may create excitement, but security creates peace. One can be intense and temporary. The other becomes the foundation upon which lasting love is built. This is why some relationships leave a person constantly questioning where they stand, while others create a quiet confidence that does not require constant reassurance. One produces anxiety, the other produces trust, and trust is one of the rarest gifts human beings can offer one another. When someone truly loves you, their actions begin to reveal it over time. Their commitment is not dependent on convenience. Their loyalty does not disappear during difficulty. Their affection is not merely emotional enthusiasm that fades when circumstances become challenging. Instead, it becomes something deeper and more enduring. Philosophers have long distinguished between desire and devotion. Desire is often focused on what a person can receive. Devotion is focused on what a person is willing to give. Desire can be intense, but unstable. Devotion remains steady because it is rooted in choice rather than impulse. This distinction matters because many people spend years mistaking one for the other. Real love is not measured by how loudly someone speaks about their feelings. It is measured by consistency. It is measured by presence. It is measured by the willingness to remain when remaining is difficult. That is why the phrase, "last true love," carries such emotional weight. It suggests something beyond temporary excitement. It points toward a relationship built on permanence, commitment, and shared purpose. It reflects the hope that after all the uncertainty, all the searching, and all the lessons learned, a person has finally found someone who is not merely passing through their life, someone who intends to stay. Of course, no one can predict the future with absolute certainty. Human relationships always require faith. They always involve risk. But there are signs that distinguish a meaningful connection from a fleeting one. A fleeting connection is often focused on the moment. A lasting connection is focused on the future. A fleeting connection asks, "How do I feel right now?" A lasting connection asks, "What can we build together?" A fleeting connection seeks excitement alone. A lasting connection seeks purpose. And purpose has extraordinary power. It gives relationships resilience during difficult seasons. It provides direction when emotions fluctuate. It reminds two people that they are working towards something greater than themselves. Perhaps this is why some relationships feel like coming home after a long journey. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because the search finally ends. The constant uncertainty begins to fade. The need to prove yourself diminishes. You no longer feel as though you must earn every ounce of affection. Instead, there is acceptance, understanding, and mutual respect. These qualities create something many people overlook when discussing love: peace. Peace is not dramatic, which is why it is often underestimated. Yet peace is one of the strongest indicators of genuine love. Chaos may feel exciting for a season. Peace sustains a lifetime. When God brings two people together with a shared foundation of trust, faith, loyalty, and purpose, the relationship begins to transcend mere emotion. It becomes a partnership, a commitment, a journey undertaken together, and perhaps that is what it truly means to be someone's last true love. Not that you are the final person they ever meet, but that you become the person with whom they choose to build the rest of their story. The person they trust with their hopes, their fears, their dreams, and their future. Because at the end of the day, lasting love is not defined by how a relationship begins. It is defined by the decision to keep choosing one another long after the excitement of the beginning has passed. And when that choice is made consistently, faithfully, and wholeheartedly, what starts as a relationship becomes something far greater, a bond capable of enduring the changing seasons of life and growing stronger with every year that follows. And so we arrive at the final question, the question that quietly sits beneath everything we have discussed. What do you do when life presents you with a blessing that does not look the way you expected? This is where many people find themselves standing at a crossroads. On one side is faith, on the other side is fear. One invites them forward, the other urges them to retreat. One asks them to trust, the other asks them to control. And while the choice may appear simple in theory, it is often profoundly difficult in practice. Human beings have a natural desire to protect themselves from uncertainty. We want guarantees before we commit. We want answers before we take action. We want proof before we trust. Yet some of the most meaningful experiences in life cannot be approached that way. Love cannot. Purpose cannot. Faith cannot. They all require a willingness to move forward without possessing complete certainty. This does not mean abandoning wisdom. It does not mean ignoring reality or refusing to think carefully. Faith is not the rejection of reason. In many ways, faith begins where reason reaches its limits. Reason can analyze possibilities. It can evaluate evidence. It can identify patterns. But eventually there comes a moment when no amount of analysis can make the decision for you. At that point, trust becomes necessary. This is true in every significant area of life. No one can guarantee that a dream will succeed before pursuing it. No one can guarantee that a friendship will last before investing in it. No one can guarantee that a relationship will be free from challenges before choosing to embrace it. Waiting for certainty often becomes another form of fear, and fear has a remarkable ability to disguise itself as wisdom. It tells us we are being careful when we are actually being hesitant. It tells us we are being realistic when we are actually being pessimistic. It tells us we are protecting ourselves when we are actually preventing growth. The tragedy is that fear rarely announces itself openly. Instead, it whispers questions that seem reasonable. What if it doesn't work? What if people don't understand? What if I get hurt again? What if this isn't really meant for me? These questions feel sensible because they focus on possible risks. But notice something important. Fear almost never asks about possibilities in the positive direction. It rarely asks, what if this becomes one of the greatest blessings of my life? What if God is opening a door I never expected? What if everything I experienced was preparing me for this moment? What if this relationship brings healing, purpose, and joy? Fear narrows vision. Faith expands it. Fear focuses exclusively on what could go wrong. Faith remains open to what could go right. That distinction changes everything. Throughout history, the people who experienced the most meaningful transformations were not necessarily the ones with the most certainty. They were the ones willing to trust despite uncertainty. They understood that life cannot be fully controlled. They recognized that some opportunities require courage before clarity arrives. And perhaps that is one of the deepest lessons God teaches throughout life. Trust is developed before understanding. Often, we want the opposite. We want understanding first, and trust afterward. We want to see the entire path before taking the first step. But growth rarely works that way. More often, the next step becomes visible only after we take the current one. Looking back, many of the events that seemed confusing at the time eventually revealed their purpose. The disappointment that redirected your path. The delay that protected you from the wrong opportunity. The challenge that strengthened your character. The closed door that guided you toward a better one. What appeared frustrating in the moment later became meaningful in hindsight. Perhaps the same principle applies now. Perhaps the person who has entered your life is not an accident. Perhaps the timing is not random. Perhaps the connection exists for reasons larger than either of you can fully see today. The future remains unwritten, but that does not mean it is without purpose. Sometimes the next chapter begins when you stop demanding absolute certainty and start embracing the possibility that God may be doing something greater than you imagined. This does not mean every opportunity should be accepted blindly. It means every opportunity should be examined honestly. Look beyond appearances. Look beyond assumptions. Look beyond fear. Evaluate character. Evaluate values. Evaluate the peace and purpose the relationship brings into your life. And then, if everything points towards something good, do not let fear make a decision that faith should make. Because opportunities are often missed, not because they were absent, but because they arrived in a form people did not expect. So if God has placed a genuine blessing before you, do not spend so much time questioning whether it fits your plans that you fail to recognize it may be part of His. One day, you may look back on this moment and realize that what seemed unusual was actually providential. What seemed uncertain was actually preparation. What seemed unexpected was actually an answer. And perhaps that is the thought worth carrying with you today. The greatest mistake is not trusting the wrong blessing. It is allowing fear to keep you from embracing the right one. When faith has examined the path and peace remains in your heart, have the courage to move forward. Sometimes, the life you have been praying for begins on the other side of the step you are afraid to take.